behind the fame this time, the tragic legacy of a Hollywood legend, the private agony of a playwright, the sad childhood of a desperate housewife, and the PR headaches of a former heartthrob. A quick glance at the life and times offstage of R&B superstar Robert Sylvester Kelly soon leads to the suspicion that the pain behind his fame is all being suffered by other people. Though if he is convicted on child pornography charges, he could soon be feeling a lot of pain. 15 years worth, in fact. That's the possible prison sentence awaiting him if he's found guilty of videotaping himself having sex with an underage girl. R. Kelly was one of the biggest-selling musical acts of the 1990s, and with the biggest ego. In 2007, he told Hip Hop magazine, "I'm the Ali of today. I'm the Marvin Gaye of today. I'm the Bob Marley of today. I'm the Martin Luther King or all the other greats that have come before us." And a lot of people are starting to realize that now. He first came to notice as the lead singer of Public Announcement, whose debut album, Born into the 90s, was released in 1992 and went platinum. The following year, Kelly went solo. Over the next decade or so, he released 12 albums and sold 15 million singles and over 50 million albums. But rumors of sexual liaisons with young girls began early. In 1995, he secretly married 15-year-old Aaliyah, the promising young singer who would later die in a plane crash at just 22. She and Kelly both denied they were wed, but a copy of the marriage license, with her age falsely shown as 18, was published by Vibe magazine. The marriage was soon annulled. More serious was the February 2002 release of a video which allegedly showed Kelly having sex with a 14-year-old girl. Again, both parties have denied being involved, but the tape quickly spread on the black market. In June, Kelly was indicted for having sex with a minor, but the charge was later reduced to soliciting a minor for child pornography. The reason for the change was that one thing the tape didn't show was actual sexual intercourse. A baffling series of delays has meant that the case has yet to be resolved, with Kelly still facing 14 of the original charges and a long prison sentence if convicted. If Rupert Everett sounds and looks like your typical upper-class Brit, it's because he is. He is descended from barons and baronets on his mother's side and can even trace his lineage back to King Charles II. His breakthrough role came in the early 80s when he appeared in the play Another Country in London's West End. His success in the film version, however, was a double-edged sword. It soon became apparent that playing an openly gay public schoolboy was a role not too far removed from Rupert himself. Coming out in the late 80s, the self-confessed ex-rent boy has since been held up as an example of a gay man who has made it in Hollywood. But if you look at the actual parts he has played, it's a different story. His most successful roles have been as Julia Roberts' gay confidant in My Best Friend's Wedding and providing the voice of the charmless Prince Charming in the 2 Shrek sequels. While he's working constantly, nobody is casting him as the leading man in mainstream movies. But perhaps that has something to do with The Next Best Thing, a romantic comedy in which he appeared with his then good friend Madonna. He later claimed, "My career ended with that movie. It came out, it did no business, and really since then I haven't worked much." And he himself believes his sexuality has harmed his career, saying that he lost the lead opposite Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct 2 because of it. On second thoughts, though, considering how badly that film flopped, maybe the resilient Rupert should realize that that particular cloud really did have a silver lining. Desperate Housewives star Terry Hatcher may not be quite as accident-prone as her on-screen alter ego Susan Mayer, but she has certainly had a run of bad luck on the relationship front. After a 3-year relationship with her MacGyver co-star Richard Dean Anderson, she married Marcus Leithold on the rebound, and within a year she was divorced. Her Her next marriage lasted 9 years until she hooked up with General Hospital star Stephen Kay, from whom she's since broken up. She's also had her fair share of false starts on the professional front. Charging out of the blocks as the object of Clark Kent's desire in Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman in the early 90s, the Californian ballet dancer looks set to be the next big thing. But since her turn as a Bond girl in 1997's Tomorrow Never Dies, she languished in guest spots and support roles until landing the role of the clumsy children's illustrator in the ABC drama series. With her career back on track, Terry hit the headlines in 2005 after revealing in a Vanity Fair article that she had suffered sexual abuse at the hands of her uncle as a child. She had kept the terrible secret to herself until her uncle was arrested years later for molesting a girl who ultimately committed suicide. Haunted by the thoughts of the 14-year-old girl who shot herself, Terry feared that he might escape conviction if she stayed silent. She plucked up the courage to relay her ordeal to the district attorney. In the end, Richard Hayes Stone, who was then 64, pleaded guilty to 4 counts of child molestation in December 2002 and was sentenced to 14 years in prison after Terry agreed to testify against him.
I think coming forward about what went on with me with abuse and being able to put that man in prison, it has been, selfishly, I guess, for me, very healing, very helpful to that particular family. But in a much broader sense, I get thousands of emails from women across the world who have been inspired to come forward to prosecute their abusers, to reach out for the help that they need to heal.
As part of her own healing process and to help inspire other women, Terry wrote her experiences down in an autobiography entitled Burnt Toast. Of all the true-life tragedies that have featured throughout this series, few have been as poignant as the story of Wizard of Oz star Judy Garland. Contracted to Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer from the age of 13, the story goes that she was fed a diet of amphetamines to get her through a grueling schedule of 3 films a year, and then given barbiturates to sleep. Her lifelong dependency on prescription medication, along with the emotional rollercoaster of showbiz life, led to mental breakdowns, relationship disasters, and multiple attempts at suicide. By the time she was found dead on the bathroom floor of her London apartment, she looked nearer 80 than 47. And although the coroner deemed that her death was due to an incautious self-overdosage of barbiturates, her Wizard of Oz co-star Ray Bolger declared at her funeral that she just plain wore out. But while Judy's struggle may have ended with her interment at New York's Ferncliff Cemetery in 1969, it seems her painful legacy was destined to live on in her eldest daughter. For not only did Liza Minnelli inherit her mother's ability to belt out a show-stopping tune, she also followed Judy's footsteps into drug and alcohol abuse. Looking back at an interview she gave not long after her mother's death, it's easy to see how.
When I was 16 and I wanted to go to New York to be on Broadway, my mom said, well, what are you going to sing for auditions? And I said, I don't know. And I was about to name something from Gypsy or My Fair Lady or something. And she said, well, you're not going to sing my songs, are you? And I said, no. It had never crossed my mind, I wanted to be a dancer on Broadway. And she said, well, do you promise? I said, yeah, Mom, I promise. She said, do you really promise?
Judy's paralyzing paranoia about her own career prevented her from wholeheartedly supporting her daughter's singing ambitions. Although her mother was clearly threatened by her talent, one of Liza's greatest regrets is that Judy never got to see the film that launched her career. 1972's Cabaret established Liza as a formidable performer in her own right and won her the year's Academy Award for Best Actress. Despite the difficulties of growing up in such an unstable environment, Liza still speaks glowingly of Judy.
I love my mother like crazy. She's my guardian angel. She's my guardian angel.
And perhaps it's that misplaced trust that has landed her in so much hot water over the past 4 decades. In fact, it was her guardian angel who introduced her to her first husband. Australian singer-songwriter Peter Allen was a protege of Judy's towards the end of her life, and in 1967, at the age of 21, Liza married him. Peter turned out to be gay, and their marriage was over 5 years later. After that, Liza hooked up with Lucille Ball's son, Desi Arnaz, and declared she was madly in love. But just as the media were preparing for an announcement of their engagement,
Engagement to Desi Arnaz has, well, the relationship has been deteriorating for some time, pleasantly, luckily, and there is no more engagement. That's all called off. And since I've been here and had this marvelous time, I also met a man called Peter Sellers and fell in love with him. And I'm very pleased to say that he fell in love with me, too. All right? And that's about all I've got to say.
When you do get married, you'll be the 4th Mrs. Peter Sellers. Does this thought bother you at all?
Oh, no. 4 is my lucky number, my dear. It actually,
You're obviously not disillusioned with the state of matrimony.
The only time I won anything on roulette was when I bet on 4.
Well, that's it then. 4.
despite her fervour, the engagement came to naught, and husbands number 2 and 3 were producer Jack Haley Jr. and sculptor Mark Garrow. After her divorce from Mark in 1992, she vowed never to marry again. And in between trips to rehab, she set about relaunching her up-and-down performing career by taking over from Julie Andrews in the Broadway show Victor Victoria. During her stint in the musical, one reviewer noted, her every stage appearance is perceived as a victory of show business stamina over psychic frailty. She asks for love so nakedly and earnestly, it seems downright vicious not to respond. Finally, the frailty got the better of her, and she was brought down by a serious case of viral encephalitis in 2000, which left doctors predicting she would spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair. Refusing to accept this prognosis, she found strength in the new man in her life, producer and concert promoter David Guest.
Well, I lost a lot of weight, and it helps me, because I have a bad back. The thinner I stay, the better I feel. So, and also, David inspired me, So I want to work. I want to laugh. I want to have fun, Everything's been a bit serious before.
Not only did he get her out of the wheelchair and back on the concert trail, the long-term bachelor and collector of Judy Garland memorabilia persuaded her to break her vow never to remarry.
We went up onto the roof. He took me up onto the roof of his apartment building. And I kind of wondered what we were doing on the roof, I had told him that I never wanted to get married again. And here we are on the roof, and I thought, wonder what's happening. And all of a sudden, I turned around, I looked for Dave, and I went like this, because he's on his knee. And
Okay,
he asked me, and I said, yes.
Their $3.5 million New York nuptials, which still stand as the most expensive in show business, left Hollywood looking like a ghost town. In fact, they were probably still paying off the caterers when the announcement came of a split just a year later. The romance of their fairy tale wedding was shattered by the acrimony of their divorce. David claimed Liza had given him herpes, while she labeled him a drug addict. Then came David's shock allegations that Liza had repeatedly abused him.
Pardon?
How are you coping with the allegations that have been in the newspapers the last couple of days?
I think she's doing great.
I mean, I'm fine.
So what's your reaction to them, though?
Well, I called my friend Yossi, and I said, Yossi, you won't believe what's being said, and this, that, and the other. And he said, darling, let's go out and have a nice evening. And people know me. They know me. They do.
Why do you think that he's done this then?
Oh, darling, I can't tell you that. You have to ask him.
But then smiling through the pain has been Liza's trademark ever since she belted out the tale of poor old Elsie in Cabaret in 1972. That number has become almost as much of a signature song for her as Over the Rainbow was for her mother. More than 35 years on, she still gives it everything she's got. But perhaps that's because she knows that each time she sings, it could be her last. In December 2007, memories of Judy's last days came flooding back when Liza showed up in Sweden for a concert tour. Mumbling her words and leaning heavily on Swedish singer Carola, she barely made it through their duet and then collapsed as she walked off stage after her fourth song. She was rushed back to New York for medical treatment. Despite her parents divorcing when she was 6, Carole Lombard did not seem to have a particularly painful life. It was almost as if she saved up all of her personal tragedy for the one devastating incident that ended her life prematurely on the 16th of January 1942. Famously feisty and a lover of practical jokes and parties, Lombard was one of Hollywood's favorite screwball comedy stars of the 1930s and early 40s. Only 5'2", the little dynamo was a natural comedian who lit up the screen in films like My Man Godfrey, Nothing Sacred, and To Be or Not to Be.
You've never been to New York?
Her first marriage was to actor William Powell, 16 years her senior. They wed in 1931 and divorced 2 years later, but even this wasn't a great trauma, as the two remained friends and enjoyed working together even after their split. Bill Powell is the only intelligent actor I've ever met, was her opinion on the matter. A couple of years later, though, she fell for the king of Hollywood, Clark Gable, and for a few years knew what it was like to be the other woman, and all the difficulties that can entail. But in March 1939, Gable finally divorced his second wife, Rhea Langham, and within 3 weeks, he and Carole were wed. Though Gable was to marry 5 times in all, everyone who knew him and Carole believed that she was the love of his life. They called each other Ma and Pa, moved to a ranch in the San Fernando Valley, and lived happily there together. He continued to be known as a philanderer, but the level-headed Carole generally took it in her stride. There was a rumor, however, that in 1941 he began an affair with Lana Turner, with whom he was filming the movie Somewhere I'll Find You. Carole was attending a war bond rally in Indiana, and the story goes that in January 1942, she got wind of the affair and so decided to catch a plane home instead of traveling by train. The plane crashed and all 22 passengers were killed, including Carole and her mother. Gable was devastated and, according to all who knew him, never got over her death. Arthur Miller was one of the greatest playwrights of the 20th century. Intellectual and compassionate, he was equally adept at taking grand universal themes or intimate personal ones and fashioning brilliant plays out of them. He could handle the personal and the political at the same time in wonderfully structured works like The Crucible, Death of a Salesman, A View from the Bridge, and All My Sons. In the 1950s, however, he achieved global recognition outside of Broadway and the literati by virtue of an extraordinary marriage. In 1956, he divorced his first wife, Mary Slattery, and then this bookish, bespectacled 41-year-old wed the most famous sex goddess on the planet, Marilyn Monroe. The union between the egghead and the bombshell stunned the world, but the marriage lasted for 5 years. During this time, though, they lived through the trauma of an ectopic pregnancy and later a miscarriage. Arthur wrote a screenplay for her, The Misfits, but by the time shooting had finished, their relationship had broken down irrevocably. 2 years later, in 1964, he produced the intensely personal play After the Fall, featuring a character widely believed to be an unflattering portrait of Marilyn. In 1962, he married Inga Marath, and they remained together until her death 40 years later. But their happy marriage had one great secret. In 1966, they had their second child together, Arthur's fourth counting the two he had with his first wife. Daniel was born with Down syndrome and was swiftly institutionalized, with Arthur refusing to publicly acknowledge him and having little to do with him right up until the playwright's own death in 2005 at the age of 89. Many close friends and associates have struggled to understand how the man who had bravely stood up to be counted during the anti-communist witch hunts of the McCarthy period, and who was once described as the moralist of the past American century, could have shut his own son out of his life. In later years, however, Arthur did seem to be wrestling with the decisions made at the time of Danny's birth, and he made several veiled references hinting at remorse in his 1987 autobiography, Time Bends. When he died, his estate was split equally between his 4 children, meaning that at the very end of his life, Arthur finally acknowledged Danny publicly as his own flesh and blood. He's one of the top-grossing film stars of all time. He runs his own studio, and in 2006, Forbes magazine named him the world's most powerful celebrity. But would you trade places with Tom Cruise? In theory, he should be the object of envy. In reality, he is the butt of many jokes. It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment when Thomas Cruise Maypether IV tipped over from heartthrob to doorknob.
They've all been very different from...
Throughout the 80s and 90s, he was packing them in with blockbusting dramas and action flicks. Consistently ranked by People magazine among the world's most beautiful people, his bankable charm made him the highest-paid star of all time, and his adoring female fan base looked solid as a rock. Perhaps it was his split with Nicole Kidman in 2001 that started to shake the foundations. While Nicole emerged as the wronged woman, Tom was branded cruel and heartless for abandoning the devoted mother of his adopted children. Some skeptical sections of the media suggested the timing of the split just before their 10th wedding anniversary was a premeditated move to ensure substantial savings on Tom's alimony payments, while internet blogs continued to speculate about Tom's sexuality. Meanwhile, Tom began stepping out with Spanish beauty Penelope Cruz. Despite their dazzling red carpet appearances, gossip magazines hinted that the relationship was merely a publicity stunt. Still, he may have easily recovered from the bitching and backbiting that go with the territory in Hollywood if he hadn't decided to hand the gutter press his head on a plate. Perhaps his decision to express his undying love for Katie Holmes by bouncing on Oprah Winfrey's couch instead of writing her a poem may have had something to do with his dyslexia. But having made that gaffe, he continued to shoot himself in the foot with repeated nauseating public displays of affection that ended with a star-studded wedding extravaganza that saw the whole of Hollywood descend upon a tiny village just outside of Rome. Since then, Tom has managed to quell one long-running rumor by fathering a daughter, Suri. Although there have been hilarious suggestions that Suri was in fact sired by the frozen sperm of Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard.
Three, two, one.